Hey everybody, how's it going? Tim Eiser here, and welcome back to Project Homestock by the Detailers Collective, a collaborative city build featuring many of your favorite creators. Now we're going to start things off by overflying the small English town of Billy, created by Scunny, with the little abandoned, kind of rundown industrial area built by FewCandy. Absolutely stunning work by both of those creators. As suggested by Sunny in his video, Billy was once a boom town in its heyday, but has since fallen on some hard economic times after most of the city's industries have packed up and moved away, leaving most of the town out of work. This is where I'm going to come in and build a brand new port area just outside of town, providing thousands of jobs for everybody and boosting the economy. Even though we're playing with unlimited money, it's the lore that counts, right? But as my demand bars would suggest, and a high unemployment rate, we have plenty of industrial trained folks that are eager to get to work. However, before starting the construction of the port, I figured that we should add a high school to the town because right now the highest achievable level of education is elementary school, and that's not really ideal. So I've expanded the town a little bit on the opposite side of the railroad tracks, and I'm gonna go ahead here and plop a large high school. I did have a bit of residential demand when I was starting this project, so expanding the town a little bit is going to provide more people for the town and more people to occupy the jobs that are going to be provided by the port. And with the high school being added, we're ready to get started on literally the biggest infrastructure project I've ever built, certainly in one episode. Now, when I got started in this project, I never intended it to be as huge as it ended up. I just kind of had this idea of building a reasonably sized port, but then I began looking at Google Maps for inspiration, and I found the small village or town of Immingham in the north of England, right next to the town of Grimsby. Now, just based off of what I see in Google Maps, without being very familiar with this region at all, we can see a small town right next to a massive port, and that's exactly what I'm going to be creating here in City Skylines 2. You know, we can assume that Immingham is almost completely supported by this large port area, so probably most of the people who are living in this town work in this massive industrial facility. So just again, judging by what I see on Google Maps, it appears that this port is a large refinery. So we have a lot of oil storage, a large refinery next to the port. I'm sure that there are a lot of other, industries that rely on this port as well. And if we look a little bit to the north, we can see these massive parking lots that seem to be for vehicle imports or maybe exports. That is exactly what we're going to be building in this episode. So this entire build is going to be heavily inspired by the port in Immingham. Now, Poplar Ponderosa, the creator of the map, was so kind and generous to provide us with a prefabricated, pre-terraformed port area just outside of the town of Billy, so super convenient. Now, I'm going to utilize this entire area, but I felt like I just needed to terraform it a little bit more. I felt like the terrain was still a little too high for my liking, so I simply lowered it a little bit, and just by doing that, we're pretty much ready to go. Now, for these seawalls that I'm building here, shout out to FewCandy because I learned from her how to create these. In her video in the Detailers Collective, what she basically does is takes some bridge pillar props, and then using the line tool, you can line them up, and then using Move It, you can set them to exactly the same height. So it creates a nice, even, realistic, convincing looking seawall. I never would have thought of this on my own. So shout out to you, FewCandy. Thanks so much. Because I'm going to be employing this method all throughout this build today, and it makes things look so much more realistic, and it's almost as convenient as the way that I used to build them, and it's great. What I used to do is use these little alley roads and then line them right up against the edge of the terrain, and then it would build kind of like a seawall. But the problem with that is it would always construct these barriers on the side, and usually in a port area or any harbor, you don't typically have large barriers on the sides, right? Maybe you have a little curb or something to prevent cars from flying off the edge of the port, but that is pretty much it. So you can get much more realistic seawalls or ports using this method. Now the only modification, the only thing I'm going to be doing different with this port is instead of taking these same bridge pillars and tipping them off to their sides like FewCandy did, what I'm going to do is just use a dirt road, an elevated dirt road, and I'm just going to set it below these bridge pillars so you don't see the barrier on the side, but it still creates a realistic looking sea wall, you know, kind of like the vertical part. So yeah, I'm going to be doing this almost surrounding the entire port area, and it's going to look super cool in the end. Now, I just also wanted to mention, forgive me guys if I'm kind of like blasting through this time lapse. I accelerated my footage to 300%. I usually do 200 or sometimes 250 for timing reasons, but in this one I'm doing 300% because let's just say if this video was 1-to-1 real time, this video would be over 5 hours long. I put probably about 6 or 7 hours of work into this entire port area, so I have no choice to accelerate it to 300% with some bits and pieces even cut out of this footage just to be able to fit everything in. So forgive me on that. There is a lot to cover today. And you know, with the outlines of the port being more or less complete, like I was kind of still in the planning phase while I was kind of terraforming this area, I thought to myself, you know, we need a way to get to the port. So there's going to be 2 ways, well, 3 technically, to get into the port. There's going to be via car, via train, and of course via boat. So there was this little twist and turn in the road, kind of, you know, nicely conforming to the terrain, and I just thought that this was the perfect location for a little trumpet interchange that would lead into the port area, whilst not totally destroying the land around the interchange. Now, another thing too is I was trying not to over-Americanize this area, you know, with my North Americanness by building a massive American-style interchange. You know, road infrastructure tends to be a little smaller in Britain, and I was just trying my best to accommodate that as best as possible, because this is actually my very first European-style build ever in City Skylines 2. I mean, that's crazy to think about, but I've never actually built anything European in the game. But after this build, I might actually consider building a British or maybe just some sort of European themed city, because I had so much fun in this build. And, you know, I only realized after building this that I might instinctively usually build in a European kind of way, because I always build my infrastructure kind of in a more compact way. My cities tend to be a little more compact than a lot of other cities that I see in YouTube, where you know, a lot of people might build these massive plazas and open green spaces in their cities. My cities always tend to be so much more dense and just coagulated together. So I don't know, maybe I'll try my hand at a European themed city one day. But, you know, at least in an industrial area, they kind of all look the same, no matter where you are in the world, you know, big factories and things like that. You know, even in Europe, where road layouts tend to be all squiggly in all kinds of directions, industrial areas are usually quite grid pattern-like. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not delving quite as deep into, you know, maybe some historical European towns or anything like that in this episode. So anyways, yeah, I'm just gonna do a little bit more terraforming here, you know, just set myself up a little bit better. Now, I kind of lied when I said that this entire port was going to be lined with these wonderful seawalls. There are parts of this build that are going to be just reclaimed land with some rocks on the side. So I just did this for a little bit of variance, and just judging again by Google Maps. I'm just trying to emulate a little bit of what I see, and you know, just keep things interesting. So forgive me here, guys, if I'm jumping around from place to place. I'm just trying to get a sense of what I want this whole port area to look like, and the best way to do that is just to kind of place some signature buildings here and there, and just kind of imagine how everything's gonna get built together. And what I'm gonna work on now for the next couple of minutes is the rail infrastructure leading into the port. And what I've done is I've ran a rail line all the way to the edge of the map. So it was quite the detour to get there, but I eventually did. And we were graciously provided on this map a separate passenger rail line and a freight rail line. So I just connected it up to the unused freight rail and we're good to go. So our rail traffic is going to be nice and seamless. So yeah, I'm gonna build a lot of these little rail spurs leading into all various locations throughout the port. And they're not gonna be functional except the main line, where a bit later in the episode, I'm gonna include an actual functional freight rail station. But a lot of these little spurs are really just for looks. And you know, they are quite common in a lot of port areas that I see. So just adds a little touch of realism, I suppose. And in between all of these little roads and rail lines, I'm going to be adding a ton of oil storage throughout this build. It's probably going to be the most prominent feature of this entire build. And I'm using for all of the oil storage, I'm using the prop building mod, I believe it's called. It essentially allows you to plop every single building in the game as a prop. And this is really useful when you're building a kind of more city painter themed build, right? Where you don't really care about the functionality of an area that much and you just want to go into like a creative mode. This mod is really, really useful. I'd never used it before and I'm learning a lot throughout this whole series because we have a mod pack that we share between all of us who are participating in this build. There's probably nearly 100 mods and various assets and things like that in the pack, and a lot of them I've never used before, such as this building prop tool. So it's really, really cool. And you know, not the entirety of this build is going to be in props because I still want part of it to be functional, right? I still want this port to provide actual jobs, and it'd be cool for the city to be functional at the same time as being highly detailed. So I am going to plop down numerous industrial buildings manually, you know, functional buildings that is, mixed in with a few prop versions of buildings as well. So you know, it's all to create an aesthetic but functional build at the end of the day. And moving on now, I'm going to be placing another one of the main buildings in this port area. However, I'm going to have to do a little bit more terraforming just to give ourselves a bit more room to build. And I'm just going to be flattening out a bit more space. And then we're going to be plopping down the functional oil refinery. So this building alone is going to provide a crap load of jobs for the town, boosting the economy and making the city ever more prosperous. Yeah, so as it turns out, we're gonna need a little bit more land than I originally anticipated, but that's okay, because we have plenty of room to play around with, and I have this massive hill here that I can just easily get rid of, and it doesn't really ruin the terrain all that much. You know, I'm just trying to be as respectful to the terrain as I possibly can, but then I also want to build so much stuff here, so I kind of compromised by flattening out this hill, but you know, with the trees and stuff, it still looks quite natural. And all of this extra room will allow me to build a bypass road going alongside the port. So this is going to facilitate the movement of goods to and from the port via trucks. So that'll be pretty exciting to see how this operates when it's fully functional. My only concern is the trumpet interchange. It's the only road leading in and out of the whole port area. So I'm not really sure how it's going to fare in the long run, especially if the town of Billy expands even further. You know, it's just a little 2-lane highway leading into town. It's the only road in and out. So I'm sure somebody at some point is going to have to come up to a solution to fix traffic. I don't know, maybe we'll get Biffa on here to fix all of our traffic mistakes, but we'll just have to see. And that's the fun part about this whole series is, as much as we can plan to say, hey, you build this and you do that, City Skylines is still somewhat of an unpredictable game. You know, you can plan your economy as much as you want and plan everything out, but then something just creeps up on you that you didn't expect, and then it derails everything that you thought was going to work. So we'll just have to see how everything scales in the long run. So what I'm doing here is I'm terraforming kind of like an upper level to the port, and this is going to be home to this large freight terminal here. So this is going to be the main entry point, connecting our road infrastructure to our rail infrastructure. So goods are going to be coming to and from the port via trucks and rail, and they'll be able to intersect in this terminal here. So a lot of goods are probably going to be coming in via rail and then being distributed to the town via trucks. So I'm assuming that's probably how things are going to operate here once we get going. But in the future, we'll just have to set some railway connections and you know, some boat connections, and then we'll see how everything functions after that. But yeah, I can't wait to see how this port is going to work and how it's going to help out the town. You can see that my industrial demand is going down, so you know that means that some of our industrial jobs are being filled in. So that's a good sign to see. Still don't have any residential demand coming up yet, but it's only a matter of time before that happens, I think. Now, just a moment ago, before placing down this rail terminal, you saw me plop down a third large building, and that is a natural gas power plant because I didn't notice, but the town was actually suffering from some power outages as the oil refinery and, you know, the other buildings that I placed down were just sucking so much power out of the system. And, you know, we only have some pretty small power plants throughout the map, so the city was in desperate need of another huge power plant. So I opted for the natural gas as it just kind of fit well into the whole theme of the build. The only thing is it produces a ton of smoke, like a lot of smoke, to the point where it's kind of a nuisance. But that's just minor details. We're not going to worry too much about that. And now I'm simply going to connect this new natural gas power plant to the existing, I think it's a coal power plant that was plopped by Scunny, I believe. In his episode in just the outskirts of the town of Billy. So essentially what he had done, just to get rid of that little icon there that appears when your power plant is not connected, he made a little underground loop. So I'm just going to tie into that, and I am going to connect both power plants together because the town and the port were operating on two separate grids. And with that being done, that is going to lead us into the, I want to say, the northern part of the port. You know, we can't really tell like which way is north, south, or whatever, but this is the orientation that I've been playing the most in. So I think this, what you're seeing on the top of your screen, would be north. So all of like the oil storage facilities that I placed early on, that would be south. I believe that's just whatever. I don't know if there's a way to know which direction is which. But anyways, in this part of the port, what I'm aiming for is I want to create this sort of massive car park that we've seen in the satellite imagery of Immingham. So this is going to be an import-export area of the port, no pun intended, but it's basically just going to be a massive slab of concrete with a lot of cars parked on it. So there's not going to be a lot to this area, but you'll see in the end, although it is very simplistic, it's gonna look really cool and add another, I guess, layer of uniqueness to this whole build. So what I'm doing here is there is no way to see the terrain contour lines when you're placing down these textures, so I just built a path that followed them and then built my concrete texture within those paths. But I don't know, I wasn't really fond of how the way this turned out, and this whole area is going to change in a little bit, so don't get too attached to it just yet. So again, guys, I apologize for jumping from one area to the next in this port, but the reason why I'm doing that is because I want to get a general sense of how everything is going to take shape, and the best way to do that is to start at the macro level. So zoom out really far, get the big picture idea of how everything is going to look or how you're imagining things, and then what I like to do is place the biggest buildings first. So that means the massive port, the actual functional port, that means the refinery, the power plants, all of the biggest infrastructure goes first, and then you can kind of build in between all of those things. Because I find if I start on the micro level, you know, really starting with the fine details and the little things like that, I just get so overwhelmed and then I never get anything done. And I was actually suffering from that early on in this build, and it wasn't until I said, okay, well, I'm just gonna start plopping buildings, filling in as much space as I can with these massive buildings, and then I can go in between each of the little nooks and crannies and then build pavement and then add a bunch of props, and then you just kind of work your way down. This is my method of developing these highly detailed areas. This is one way that I've always operated in. I know it's probably gonna be different for every creator. Everybody just kind of has their Zen mode, I'm sure, that they get into, and it might look different from creator to creator, but just in case you guys were curious, that is kind of my operating method. Unfortunately, that might lead to a little bit of a less pleasurable viewing experience. I don't know. Maybe you guys don't think that way, but you know, if I'm watching my footage again and I'm kind of like jumping from place to place, and I'm hoping you guys don't feel frustrated, but just know that there are reasons for jumping around from place to place. But just know that at the end of this build, you know, everything is going to come together and it's going to look really cool on the macro level and on the micro level once everything is done. You know, just trust the process. And I know you guys, I used to make my old Tim Buckton videos and stuff back in the day, and those they drew in pretty loyal crowds, and you know that those series were in a very similar kind of fashion as what I'm doing here today. So I don't know, it's been a really long time since I've built a more detail-oriented build like I'm doing today, you know, with heavy prop usage and textures and decals, those kind of things. You know, I just feel like City Skylines 2 just isn't there yet in comparison with City Skylines 1 as far as like propage goes and detailing and all that stuff. So I've kind of refrained from doing any like big detailing builds, but I'd have to say in the last few months, there's been a heck of a lot more, you know, props and decals and things like that that are propping up on the Paradox Mods workshop. So I think we're starting to see the early stages of, you know, being able to build these really, really realistic and detailed builds. So I think it's an exciting time, and yeah, I'm excited to see how the game is going to develop over the next while, and to see everybody's crazy builds that they come up with. But at the end of the day, you know what? Even with a very limited amount of props, it's astounding. It's crazy what some people come up with, right? Just look what Picanna came up with using all vanilla props in the very first episode of Detailers Collective. Absolutely amazing. It's one of the most crazy, unique builds I've ever seen. And that, again, is just done using vanilla props. So, you know, you can still have a ton of fun and create these wonderful builds with very limited amount of assets. So speaking of, detailing and decals and all the micro stuff, I'm now going to start to jump into exactly that. So now that a lot of the big main infrastructure has been plopped down, I'm ready to get started on the more micro level. So a lot of these open spaces here are going to be turned into pavement, and just like the real port and a lot of other ports, a lot of these empty spaces tend to be filled with a lot of junk, a lot of just pallets and barrels and all kinds of stuff. From what I've seen, a lot of, you have ports where everything is very nice and organized. You have ports where everything is just kind of thrown all over the place. I don't really know how ports operate, but I think I'm just going to include kind of a mix of the two. Some areas in this port, I'm just going to throw a bunch of stuff down, and other areas I'm going to make an effort to make them a bit more organized. So, I don't know. I'm just kind of having fun, guys. It's been a really long time since I've played around with, this level of detailing. So it's nice to get back into it now that it's becoming more and more possible in City Skylines 2. So for whatever reason, these trailers are just plopping in black, and they're not going into various colors. So what I'm going to do to fix that is just use the recolor mod and pretty much just go one by one and change their colors. I'm going to work on that a little bit later. Kind of funny now, unbeknownst to me at this point in the build, I totally forgot that I have the vehicle props mod installed. And this is another really cool mod that it's the first time I'm using, first time I'm experiencing this. And it essentially allows you to plop vehicles as props. And I think the problem that I was having is a lot of the vehicles that I'm plopping down were disappearing because I was plopping them as actual vehicles using the Find It tool. They were just kind of coming up in the list of vehicles. And as soon as I would plop them down, they were just disappearing. So it took me a little while to remember that I had the vehicle prop mod installed. And, that's a lifesaver when you're building a highly detailed build like this. And you know what? Why not have a little fun while we're at it? Here I'm plopping down some graffiti decals made by Senior Tonti, and these are really special because they are creator decals. So he's made a collection of content creator graffiti decals of pretty much all the known content creators on YouTube and all the other platforms. So it's really, really cool to see. We got Canadian Moose on here. We got myself, Timmeister. We got Biffa. We got pretty much all of the known content creators. So, it's kind of fun to plop these all over the place. And you know what? I figured this would be the most appropriate place to have these sort of things because this is a dirty, old, grimy industrial area, and it's not uncommon that they are just plastered all over the place with graffiti. So having a little fun here, placing down some decals, and we're gonna make things look all, nice and grimy, just the way we like it. And after some vertical decals have been placed, we're gonna place some horizontal ones on the ground. We're gonna make things look all dirty, and I feel like placing ground decals goes a long way in terms of realism. So just creating some patches on the roads and just putting some garbage everywhere and creating placing down some stain on the pavement. Just these simple decals that you can plop make a world of difference if you're aiming for realism. So a little earlier in the video, you may have noticed that I laid down a sort of concrete texture on the ground. And after a little bit of consideration, I decided to get rid of it and then redo the entire thing with a more darker pavement. And I don't know, I just felt like this matched a little bit more of what I'm seeing on Google Maps, and it's easier to make pavement look a little bit more grimier, and I just feel like the textures work a little bit better. So no, you're not going crazy. It is actually a different color. So what I'm going to work on now is something that's pretty unique. It's the first time that I do anything like this in City Skylines 2. Now, one observation I've made is in a lot of these oil-driven ports, instead of having ships that are carrying oil, you know, parked directly up against the wharf or dock up exactly against the port, there's always these pipes that are kind of extruding into the water, and they probably go out to the channel, I'm assuming, and ships will actually dock directly to those. So these things look like just a series of pipes, and I'm sure that there are probably some nozzles or something that connect directly to the ships when they're docked, just to facilitate the transportation of oil. So I'm going to be building one of these things. I know nothing about oil production other than the very basics. So if anybody is, maybe works in the oil field or in the oil sector who deals with these kind of boat connector, whatever you want to call them, please shed some light. And it'd be cool to kind of learn a little bit about how these operate. But anyways, this is exactly what I'm building here in the game. And I'm going to be using a lot of the building props that I spoke about earlier. So in the oil industry of the game, we have like these kind of very basic industrial buildings that are just a series of pipes. So I decided to plop down a couple of those, as well as just some regular pipe props. And what I do is I am using the Move It tool to have them sit just above the water line. And what's cool about Move It is, like I explained earlier, you can just highlight a whole bunch of props, set them to exactly the same level, and bam, then you're done.
So, you know, of course I can plop a boat as well, because we do have boats available as props. And yeah, here I have a little bit of a mishap. So anyways, just a little, a cool little thing that I decided to add to the port. And I think it adds, you know, another level of detail, because you don't often see these kind of things in the game. And anyway, that was just a quick little thing I added. It only took like maybe 10 minutes real time to build. And now we're gonna move on to some more oil storage, just a bit farther up in the port area. So over the next couple of minutes, I'm gonna let you guys enjoy some chill tunes while I just go over some of the more micro detailing of the port. That entails, you know, just some decals, lots of construction materials, random pallets, things like that. I'm just gonna kind of dirty up the port area all nice and neat, or well, exactly the opposite of that really. But anyways, I'm gonna stop rambling on now for a couple of minutes and sit back and enjoy the cinematics. All right, I'm back, guys. And one thing I just wanted to point out here is I haphazardly came to realize that these specific buildings that I'm plopping down here, they're not exactly buildings, they're just pipes, but they are part of the oil industry buildings that would come up naturally when you zone them. But some of these pipes are actually quite high up, and I thought it would just be cool to create like these little bridges that would go over the road. So I had to do quite a bit of fiddling here to get everything to fit. But I think the results are pretty neat because this is kind of like a main road going through the port, and you know, cars are just gonna have to drive under these pipes. So I don't know, it's all the small details, right guys? It's all these little things that add so much depth, and I don't know, it just makes some more cool little details. And of course, this wouldn't be an oil-driven port if there was not a bunch of rail cars sitting around. So these giant fuel containers. So I decided to plop a few of them on the unused line. So a lot of the rail lines that are going through the port are not really functional at all. They're for aesthetics, so I can do that there. Although this main line here is going to be fully functional, and I suspect it's probably going to be a pretty busy area once the town starts ramping up and industry starts to kick in. So anyways, for the remainder of this episode, we're going to continue the trend of just some micro detailing, you know, all kinds of little props and things. And before we wrap up the episode, I'm going to get into the car park of the build. So we're going to detail that in a little bit. And you're going to want to stay tuned to the very end of this episode, guys, because I am going to be providing some cinematics of this entire build from, you know, both zoomed out as far as I can go and zoomed in. So you'll get to see all of the little details that we've worked on today in a more, you know, cinematic and kind of slow pace where you can get to enjoy the build, because, you know, everything is just kind of accelerated and it might not be enough time to notice, you know, some little things that I'm working on, but I'll be sure to include some nice cinematics that really showcases what we've built here today. So now I'm going to transition into building a very critical piece of infrastructure, and that is a massive recycling area. Because I noticed that there has been a lot of garbage piling up, icons that are sprawling up through town, and I checked around town and I think we don't really have any garbage management at all. We're completely exporting all of our garbage, and I'm sure that there's just not enough trucks around to deal with the demand. So the port is a perfect area for such a large recycling center because it is huge and it causes a lot of pollution. So I figured, you know what? I was only going to place some boring old warehouses here anyways. Might as well just put a giant piece of functional infrastructure in the middle of the port. And plus, it looks really cool. All right, so now is the part of this video where we're going to be getting into the final area of this port, and we're going to be working on the car park, we'll call it. And as I explained earlier, this is simply going to be a massive car park where a bunch of imported cars, or probably exported cars, I mean, maybe we can assume that these are, since this is a British town, maybe we can assume that these are like Range Rovers or something like that. You know, it's that'd be pretty cool. But I mean, there's gonna be all kinds of different cars here that we're gonna plop down. So not just Range Rovers. So yeah, like I explained a bit earlier, there's not gonna be a whole lot to this car park. I mean, it's literally just gonna be a big lot with a bunch of cars. But, you know, nonetheless, it's the details that count, right? So I think it's still gonna be a pretty unique piece of infrastructure. And just for looks, I am going to run a rail line over to the car park, just because from the satellite imagery that I was looking at, there seems to be some rail infrastructure that goes to these places. There's actually a very similar piece of infrastructure in my hometown, which is kind of a small city, but oftentimes cars for all the dealers throughout the city will arrive by train to this area in my town where it's literally just a railroad track that leads to a giant slab of concrete where the cars are unloaded. There's no infrastructure that's permanently there. There's no cranes or anything. I'm assuming that they must bring, you know, some sort of forklift or loaders on site to unload the cars. So that's exactly what I'm gonna be building in this build. Just, you know, a big car park with a rail leading to it. But it's gonna be pretty cool. And that pretty much does it as far as propage goes. And now I'm just gonna add some decals, you know, just to add a bit more texture to these pavement areas, and you know, just make it a little bit grimier, make it a bit more realistic. Because you know, as pavement ages, cracks begin to show, and you know, all that stuff. So I think in a detail-oriented build, it's important to showcase, you know, with all these imperfections that are just a normal part of any city. And that's pretty much going to do it for this episode, guys. So like I said, you better stay tuned to the very end, because there's going to be some really cool cinematics showcasing everything, and you'll get a really good glimpse of everything that we've built today. So apart from adding maybe a little, you know, shrub here and some trees here, and you know, I'm going to still add a couple of details here and there before the end of this episode. But I have to say, it was really, really a privilege and an honor to be able to participate in this build, along with a bunch of other really great, fantastic creators. This was a ton of fun, and I can't wait to see what the next participants are going to build. Now, one piece of advice to whoever's going after me, I'm not sure on that. I think the town probably could use some sort of university or college at this point, because the entire city is lacking educated workers. And you know, if we're going to be a prosperous kind of region, we're going to need to up the educational capacity of our population. So you can kind of see all of the buildings are struggling to find workers, and that is just due to the fact that there's, you know, high school is still the highest achievable level of education in the town right now. So yeah, eventually we're gonna have to look into that. So one last little thing that I'm working on here, guys, I'm just gonna add a whole bunch of pallets and, you know, things that are potentially getting loaded onto this boat via forklift, and we're gonna wrap things up. So again, huge honor, huge privilege to have been able to participate in this build. Thank you so much for Canadian Moose for inviting me over to this project. So that is going to be it for me today. I thank you so much, guys, for tuning in and checking out my video. Please be sure to also go check out all of the other creators who I'm going to link below, who are participating in this this collaborative build. Please go check out their channels, subscribe, go show them some love. And to this video, if you enjoyed it, leave a like, leave a comment down below. Also, don't forget to subscribe. And if you're interested, I would highly encourage you to go check out my Patreon, as there's some pretty cool perks to be had on there. So guys, thank you so much again for watching. That is it, and I'll catch you in the next one.